Imagine you're sitting in one of those high-level executive meetings. You know the ones.
Oh, yeah, the heavy mahogany table. Everyone's in suits.
Exactly. And your team is on the absolute verge of approving this major new technology tool. Like, the budget is finally secured, the department heads are all nodding along, and you're literally holding the pen ready to sign the contract.
But there's a catch, right? There's always a catch.
A massive catch. The capabilities of this software, the core features it offers, and honestly, the fundamental risk profile it carries, they will literally change by next month.
Oh, wow. Yep.
Right. By the time you finish this meeting and walk back to your desk, the tool might have learned how to do something completely new, something that was absolutely not in the vendor's original pitch.
Which is, I mean, that's just a nightmare for leadership.
Totally. So how do you govern a system that absolutely refuses to stand still?
It's the ultimate leadership headache, really, because organizations are fundamentally wired to build, you know, static fences around predictable assets.
Right.
So when you introduce this constantly moving target into an environment that was built for like 5-year strategic plans,
And those agonizingly slow procurement cycles?
yes, it completely short circuits the entire decision-making apparatus. It just breaks the system.
And we're diving straight into that exact tension today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at a brand new white paper that was just released by the ILO group.
It's a really fascinating piece of work.
It is. The title is Adaptive Governance for AI in K-12, Organizing for a Competency, Not a Tool. And I should point out, while the focus here is strictly on K-12 education, the insights are universally applicable to pretty much any sector.
Absolutely. The structural problems they identify, they happen everywhere.
Exactly. And we're going to be pulling really heavily from the insights and observations of the ILO Group's CEO. That's Dr. Julia Rayful-Bear.
Right, and she frames this in a really interesting way, not just as a technology problem, but as a profound crisis of organizational psychology.
Which is such a powerful way to look at it, because the core mission of our deep dive today is to really unpack this massive strategic shift that systems have to make right now.
Moving away from that frantic, reactive adoption of AI.
Yeah, and stepping into intentional, disciplined leadership.
Yeah.
Because we can't just keep reacting.
No, we definitely can't. And to appreciate the scale of that shift, we really first have to dissect why the old way of buying and managing technology is just failing so spectacularly when it comes to AI.
Let's get into that. Because historically, large organizations, especially public school districts, they've relied heavily on what the paper calls a procure and protect model.
Procure and protect. It's basically the default setting for bureaucracy.
Right, so let's look at the mechanics of that in action. Under normal circumstances, if a district wants to buy, say, a new digital math curriculum,
They issue a request for proposals,
yeah,
an RFP.
right, a massive RFP, and a committee spends an entire academic year just evaluating the options. They check the vendor security credentials, they negotiate a multi-year contract, run professional development for the teachers over the summer.
And then they essentially lock that policy in a drawer for 3 years.
Exactly. And they can afford to do that because the software is deterministic.
Right. And that word deterministic is the key to that entire legacy system.
Because a traditional digital worksheet looks the exact same every single time a student logs in.
Yep. The underlying code operates on these rigid if-then rules. If a student types in 2 plus 2, the software returns 4,
Always 4.
always 4. And if another student on the other side of the district types in the same thing, they get the exact same result. The leaders who bought the tool know exactly what it will do on day 1, and they know it will do the exact same thing on day 1,000.
But artificial intelligence completely shatters that predictability, right? Because AI is probabilistic, not deterministic.
Exactly. It does not follow a hard-coded path at all.
It's constantly calculating the most probable next word or outcome based on vast data sets. So, like, if a student is struggling with fractions, a traditional program just flashes a red X and shows the exact same explanation again.
Which is often super frustrating for the student.
Totally. But an AI tutor, on the other hand, might notice from the student's previous prompts that they, really love baseball.
Oh, right.
And it will dynamically generate a brand new word problem about batting averages to explain the concept. It adapts in real time.
Which is brilliant for learning, but terrifying for governance. Dr. Julia Rayful-Bear observes that this probabilistic nature creates a completely new operating condition for leaders.
A new operating condition.
Yeah, you are no longer deploying a product. You are managing a continuous stream of real-time decisions. And the traditional K-12 governance structure, it was engineered to move slowly, specifically to prevent mistakes.
Right, to be safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you feed a highly dynamic, probabilistic tool into a rigid, slow-moving machine, it just grinds the gears to an absolute halt.
And the sources actually refer to this specific bottleneck. They call it the triple veto paralysis, which is such a great term.
It really is, and it's a fascinating phenomenon because, honestly, nobody involved is actually doing a bad job.
Right, they're all just fulfilling their mandates.
But the collective result is total gridlock. Every bureaucracy has these built-in defense mechanisms.
So imagine a group of teachers discovers a generative AI tool that saves them like 10 hours a week on lesson planning.
Which is a huge win.
Huge. So they ask to use it officially, but the IT department immediately hits pause.
Because their mandate is network security. They need to know if this tool is opening a back door into the district's system.
Right. And then the legal department hits pause because their mandate is compliance.
They have to review the data privacy agreements. They have to ensure student information isn't being scraped to train a public model.
And finally, the curriculum department hits pause because their mandate is academic integrity. They're waiting on state guidance about whether AI-generated rubrics even meet pedagogical standards.
So you have IT, legal, and curriculum all locked in this standoff. They're all trying to achieve zero risk.
But meanwhile, the clock is ticking. And the teachers and students, they're just using the tools anyway.
Exactly. They use them on their personal smartphones, or they just bypass the network entirely.
Yeah, so the triple veto creates this illusion of control. The leadership thinks, oh, we've paused AI adoption.
When really all they have done is push it into the shadows, where they have absolutely zero oversight.
Shadow adoption, which is arguably the most dangerous operating condition of all.
It absolutely is. Attempting to manage AI like a traditional software subscription, it fundamentally misinterprets what the technology even is.
It really does. I like to think of it like this. Treating AI like a software subscription is basically like treating literacy as a textbook purchase.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You don't buy literacy for an organization. You don't hand a principal a box of books and say, great, we've checked the literacy box for the decade. Good job, everyone.
Right. Literacy is a core competency.
Exactly. You weave it into every single department, you train for it continuously, and you adapt your strategies as the organization grows. And AI demands that exact same treatment. It is a competency, not a calculator.
And a competency requires ongoing development.
Yeah.
Judgment, adaptation. It forces an organization to build new muscles. Whereas a tool just requires an instruction manual and a budget line.
So we have these leaders sitting in executive meetings, totally paralyzed by the triple veto, and watching their staff adopt these probabilistic systems in the shadows.
Yeah.
So how do they break this gridlock without, throwing the doors wide open to massive security risks?
Well, they have to restructure their organizational mindset way before they touch their organizational chart.
Okay, so where do they start?
The white paper introduces this foundational step, and they call it the learning agenda. This is where a system names its desired outcomes long before it starts naming the actual tools it wants to buy.
That makes sense, because people get so hypnotized by the flashy features of a new release.
Oh, completely.
They essentially go shopping without a grocery list. They see a tool that can instantly generate hyper-realistic videos or, summarize 100 PDFs in 3 seconds.
And they just think, we have to have this. Where can we put it?
Right. But the learning agenda reverses that flow entirely.
Exactly. You start by isolating a high-priority systemic problem. You ask, how can we use this technology to solve the chronic teacher burnout that's causing our staffing shortages?
Or, how can we build an early warning system that identifies students who are quietly falling behind in reading?
Yes. You clearly define the problem. And this is the really crucial part. You decide in advance what evidence would justify expanding an AI pilot and what evidence would force you to shut it down.
Right, setting the metrics for success beforehand. Because without establishing that threshold for success and failure up front, you just end up with initiative accumulation.
Yes. Districts just collect these disconnected software licenses.
They run a dozen different pilots that never talk to each other. Nothing ever scales to the whole system. And the staff just gets absolutely crushed under the weight of constant disjointed change.
And that exact friction brings us to one of the most vital observations from Dr. Julia Rafel-Behr. She points out the absolute necessity of strategic abandonment.
Strategic abandonment. Okay, let's unpack that.
Well, AI integration takes massive cognitive effort. You cannot simply layer a complex new competency onto staff who are already drowning in their daily responsibilities.
No, of course not. They're maxed out.
So the white paper stresses that within the first 60 days of launching an AI governance initiative, systems must deliberately and visibly stop doing low-impact work.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back a little here on behalf of anyone listening who works in a massive organization.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
Strategic abandonment sounds fantastic in a pristine white paper, but let's talk about the reality of working in a sprawling bureaucracy.
It's messy.
It's so messy. Every single legacy program, every outdated spreadsheet, every manual compliance report, it all has a manager who will fight to the death to keep it.
Because people tie their professional identities to those processes.
Exactly. You can't just sit in a boardroom and decree, hey, everyone, stop doing things. How does a leader actually force an organization to let go of that stuff?
Honestly, that is the hardest part of the leadership shift. And it requires relying on hard data rather than office politics.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Strategic abandonment isn't just a retreat, right? It is the mechanism that actually funds your transformation. The white paper provides a blueprint. You start with an aggressive audit of the existing technology stack. You look for the shelfware.
Ah, shelfware. The software that sits on the proverbial shelf collecting dust while quietly draining the budget.
Exactly. You pull the usage analytics for every contract signed in the past 3 years. Because when a superintendent can walk into a meeting with hard data showing that the district is spending, say, $80,000 a year on a legacy reading platform that less than 12% of teachers even log into.
Oof. Yeah, that changes the conversation entirely.
It removes the emotion from the conversation. You consolidate the redundant reporting systems. You disband the committees that haven't produced a tangible outcome in 2 years.
It's kind of like pruning an overgrown tree.
That's a great way to look at it.
You can't just graft a massive, complex, new branch like artificial intelligence onto a tree that is already dying from overgrowth and tangled roots. You have to aggressively prune the dead wood.
Right, you cut away the unused software and the redundant meetings so that the root system has enough nutrients.
Meaning time, budget, and mental bandwidth.
Yes, to actually feed the new growth. And pruning creates the necessary environment for what the paper calls the safe yes.
The safe yes. I like that.
Yeah, when leaders have clawed back budget and time through strategic abandonment, they no longer have to reflexively say no to new ideas just out of fear or exhaustion.
They have the actual capacity to pilot a new tool, monitor its probabilistic outputs safely, and evaluate it against their learning agenda.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's transition from the mindset stuff to the actual blueprints. Because once an organization has cleared the dead wood and established its learning agenda, who is actually in charge of the execution?
Right, the structure.
Yeah, we're moving away from 3-year review cycles and shifting to, what, 12-week pilot sprint cycle?
Correct. You test, you refine, and you either scale or kill the project.
So who is managing that kind of speed?
The white paper outlines 3 distinct models of what they call adaptive governance. Because obviously, a massive, well-funded system cannot operate the exact same way as a scrappy, mid-sized organization.
Sure.
So let's start with this scenario of a massive, highly complex system. This requires Model A, which is dedicated leadership.
Dedicated leadership. So in Model A, an organization appoints a full-time chief AI officer or a CAIO.
Exactly. And this person reports directly to the top executive, like the superintendent or the CEO.
So they have real authority.
Yes. They manage a cross-functional working group and have their own dedicated staff whose entire job is AI implementation. It really signals that the organization is treating AI with the same gravity as finance or human resources.
But there's a risk there too, right? The danger of Model A is the temptation to create a silo.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge risk.
If a chief AI officer just sits in a central office all day, theorizing about algorithms and reading tech blogs, they become totally detached from the operational reality of the classroom.
Right. The CIO's job is not to make every single tactical decision. Their job is to build the operating system for decision-making.
They design the intake process, they define the risk parameters.
And then they push the actual execution back to the academic and operational leaders who actually know the students best.
Okay, but let's be realistic here. A lot of mid-sized organizations just do not have the budget or the political capital to invent a brand new executive position.
And that leads to Model B, integrated leadership.
Right.
Here, the AI portfolio is embedded into an existing senior role, like a chief technology officer or a chief academic officer.
But the critical caveat here is that they must be given dedicated operational support. You can't just add the letters AI to a CTO's email signature and suddenly expect systemic transformation.
No, because that creates the full plate problem.
Yeah, if the CTO is already managing network outages, laptop repairs, cybersecurity insurance, and now artificial intelligence.
AI will only get their attention when something literally catches on fire.
Right, they need a team underneath them doing the day-to-day pilot monitoring.
Which brings us to the leanest option, Model C, distributed leadership.
How does that one work?
The superintendent acts as the primary sponsor, but they designate a point person, usually a trusted director, who dedicates about a third of their time to coordinating a cross-functional working group.
Got it. So this working group pulls expertise from IT, legal, and curriculum as needed without requiring permanent new hires.
Exactly. And the brilliance of these three models is that they are not permanent destinations. They are an evolutionary progression.
Right, you can graduate from one to the next.
The white paper explicitly identifies the trigger for that change. When the demand for AI tools from your staff outpaces your governance structure's ability to evaluate them safely, you have outgrown your model.
So if you're using a distributed model and suddenly the working group is facing a backlog of 50 pilot requests and teachers are reverting to shadow IT?
That is the structural signal to graduate to an integrated or dedicated model.
Okay, but regardless of whether you have a massive CAIO team or just a lean distributed group, the paper emphasizes a structural fix for that triple veto paralysis we just walk us through those tiers.
Sure. The strategic tier belongs to the cabinet or the board. They own the why and the if.
Like the big picture.
Exactly. For example, they decide, will we allow AI to be used in grading student essays? They set the ethical and pedagogical boundary.
Okay, then you move down to the tactical tier. This would be your cross-functional working group figuring out the how and the who.
Right. They take the board's directive and decide, okay, we will pilot AI grading, but only in 11th grade history classes, and only using these 3 approved vendors.
And finally, the operational tier handles the what. The IT and curriculum teams manage the actual integration.
Right, they figure out how the API connects to the learning management system, things like that.
So when you separate these tiers, the superintendent is no longer trapped in a meeting debating CSV file uploads.
And the IT department doesn't feel the need to stall a project because they're confused about the pedagogical intent. Everyone stays in their lane, and the whole process accelerates.
I really want to take all this organizational theory, the learning agendas, the pruning of the tech stack, the adaptive models, and look at how it actually functions in the real world.
The Charlotte Mecklenburg case study.
Yes. The white paper provides this phenomenal case study with Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. We're talking about one of the largest systems in the country here, serving over 140,000 students.
So given that immense scale, they naturally deployed a Model A approach.
Right. And Superintendent Crystal Hill's approach to condition setting here is just a masterclass in change management.
It really is. She didn't launch the initiative by just handing out login credentials and celebrating the future.
No, she established a cross-functional steering committee and kicked off the entire process with a data privacy summit.
Grounding the conversation in safety first builds organizational trust.
Totally. Because before a single AI tool was allowed to touch the district's network, they built this mandatory structural safeguard called the Gateway.
And the Gateway really revolutionized their procurement. It mandated that legal vetting and IT security reviews were not like optional parallel processes.
They were the absolute first hurdle.
Exactly. No vendor conversation could even begin until the tool met strict data sovereignty requirements. They ensured that the probabilistic nature of the AI wasn't going to secretly feed student data back into public training models.
They laid the plumbing before they turned on the water.
I love that phrase.
Yes. They built an intricate, secure infrastructure to handle the pressure of the new technology so that when the tools were finally released, the end users didn't have to worry about the pipes bursting.
And once that secure gateway was in place, they scaled the rollout organically rather than forcing a top-down mandate.
Right. They created an application process to designate AI champion schools.
They essentially turned adoption into a privilege instead of a requirement.
Which is so smart. Central office teams reviewed the applications to ensure school-level readiness. Then, they provided intensive hands-on training to over 200 educators.
And those educators returned to their buildings not just as users, but as localized facilitators.
They built the capacity from the classroom up, embedding the competency directly into the teaching staff.
By front-loading the unglamorous heavy lifting of governance, The legal reviews, the steering committees, the decision rights AI ceased to be a flashy, isolated initiative.
It just wove itself into the fabric of the organization.
Exactly. It became an invisible thread supporting every department securely.
It actually became a competency. Well, we have covered tremendous ground today. We started by diagnosing the failure of the procure and protect model.
Right, because you cannot manage a probabilistic, constantly evolving intelligence using the same rigid checkpoints you'd use to buy a static textbook.
And we examined the necessity of a learning agenda, naming the organizational problems you want to solve before you get distracted by the shiny new tools.
We explored how strategic abandonment and auditing that shelfware creates the crucial bandwidth needed to actually say a safe yes.
And we broke down the adaptive governance structures, dedicated, integrated, and distributed, and how clarifying decision rights permanently breaks the triple veto paralysis.
Just like we saw in the Charlotte Mecklenburg case study.
So think about your own professional environment right now, whether you're in education, healthcare, or corporate strategy. Are you still trapped in a procure and protect mindset?
Are your departments stuck in a standoff while your staff secretly adopts shadow IT?
Or are you actively pruning the deadwood to build the organizational muscle needed for real-time adaptation?
Because the environment is shifting way too fast to rely on the old defense mechanisms.
It really is. I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, drawn from the deepest implications of the source material.
Oh, the human-in-the-loop mandate.
Yes. The white paper advocates for a strict human-in-the-loop mandate. This means no consequential AI output, like a student's final grade or a critical disciplinary recommendation, should ever be finalized without human review.
Because the technology simply isn't infallible. It is a non-negotiable safeguard for protecting human dignity in automated systems.
But project that mandate into the future. If artificial intelligence is truly evolving from a novel software tool into a fundamental competency like reading, writing, or mathematics,
Yeah.
imagine returning to that high-level executive meeting we pictured at the start of our deep dive. Right now, the dominant fear in that room is the risk of adopting AI unsafely.
Right. The fear of doing it wrong.
But will we soon reach a tipping point where failing to use AI to personalize a struggling student's learning, or failing to use it to relieve your staff of crushing administrative burdens, is considered a profound failure of leadership?
Wow.
Just as much as failing to govern it safely is today, the target is moving faster every month. The real question is, are you building the systems to move with it?